Before we can do anything with PHP, we need to examine the way that it manipulates and stores values. PHP does this through variables. All PHP variables must be prefixed with the $sign and cannot begin with numbers, though they can have numbers in them elsewhere in the variable's name. So in this respect, it's just like Java and C++. PHP is loosely typed, and it implements type juggling, sort of like Visual Basic, where it converts variables to the right type on the fly in the interpretation process. This is in contrast to C++ and Java, which are more strongly typed, and variables must be declared of a specific type and size before they can be assigned values. PHP does not have a Boolean data type, but considers 0 as false and 1 as true, just like C++. Here's a bit of code with some variable examples. In this case, x and y, which hold numbers, and z, which holds a string value. The variables above are sequentially of type integer, double, and string. Unlike Java and C++, they do not require a specific type declaration. They are converted to the correct data type on the fly. Here we have some examples of variable declaration, initialization, and usage. If you look at the second line of code here in the first example, we're using the function printf instead of echo. Printf in PHP works sort of like printf does in the old C language, in which case we can pass in multiple arguments. So we have a string literal as the first argument, and then after the comma, the second argument is the variable first name holding the value of link. So it's not going to display example 1 equals welcome to the game %s, but it will display welcome to the game and then link. Why? Because %s is a formatting argument that will format it and basically take the value in this string and display it with this string literal. Concatenation. If you look at the next example, x and y are two numbers. X is 7 sevens, or 7,777,777, and then y is 444, or 3 fours. If you look at the second line of code here, printf, we have a string literal once again, and we have our two variables this time, x and y. So for x, we have %4d. That's telling, in this case, printf to display the value stored in x here. And then for y, we have %.3f, and that's telling printf to display the value in y. Now let's take a look at the formatting. The 4d means that to the left of the decimal, it will display up to 4 digits. So since x has a value of 7 sevens, even though it's 7,777,777, it's only going to display 4 sevens because of the formatting here, okay? Now, if you look at this formatting argument, this relates to y. So y has a value of 444, but what this says is to the right of the decimal, display the result up to 3 digits from the, to the right of the decimal. So in this case, it's going to add .000. If you look at the next example here, we have two variables, first name and phone number for Charles and phone number here. Well, again, we're doing the same thing, but this has some additional formatting. Okay, so if you were to take a look at this example, we're using, in this case, a wildcard. And along with the wildcard, we're setting the column width, the maximum and minimum column width there, and aligning things to the left. And if you look at this example here, we have another two variables, pi and national deficit, and we're using the number format function that we discussed previously. So if we run this, let's see what it looks like. Okay, and example 1, welcome to the game link. We are giving it 100%, a number. My number, notice that to the right of the decimal, there's the extra additional 3 digits because of the formatting argument. And then again, notice the effects of the number format function down here. If you were to look at the HTML source, remember that this is not the PHP code. This is just a dynamically written HTML code that the PHP code created on the server and sent to the client. Like C++ and Java, PHP supports typecasting. PHP variables can be automatically or explicitly typecast and converted. A string, 4.44 in characters, can be automatically converted to the double 4.44, with type juggling by the context in which it is used in code. Alternatively, you may explicitly typecast values by placing a data type in parentheses, as you would in C++ and Java. So if you look at the following code, in this case, we have variables x and y. They are both being explicitly typecast to the integer data type by putting that data type in parentheses and prefixing it before the variable. In this example, we're examining the concept of typecasting. We have two variables, x and y, and they're doubles. They have a large decimal portion, 12.34563 and 45.78976. But if you look in this if-else block of code, we're taking the double x and the double y, and we're explicitly typecasting it to the integer data type by taking the data type integer and placing it inside of open and closing parentheses. What this will effectively do is truncate or shave off the decimal portion of x and y. The reason is that an integer is a smaller data type or consumes less memory than a double. However, because of that, it is also less precise. Once again, we're explicitly typecasting x to an integer, so we're going to display it, and you'll notice that when we do, it's going to shave off or truncate the decimal portion. So if we were to run this, y with a value of 45 is the result, as opposed to y with the value of 45.78976. PHP also supports constants, like when you use the keyword final in Java, or the keyword const in C++. Constants create a variable whose value cannot be changed. Constants are created by using the define function, which takes two arguments, the name of the constant and the value to be stored in it. So if you look at the following bit of code, in this case, we're defining a constant named best weapon, and its value, of course, would be master sword, if you're a Zelda fan. Defined function, defined with a D at the end of it, returns true or false based on whether or not a constant has been defined. And you can use it like so. If you'll take a look at this bit of code, in the condition part of the if statement, we have defined and best weapon. So we're checking to see whether or not the constant best weapon has been defined. And if it has been, it'll simply display this better be the master sword in the HTML document being sent to the client. Here in this example, we're defining constants. To do so, we need to use the method define, which takes two arguments, the name of the constant and the value to be stored in it. Now, the define method is different from the defined method that ends in a D. The define method is used to create the constant. The defined method that ends with a D is used to tell whether or not a constant exists or has a value. So if we've defined the constant best weapon, and we plug it into an if statement here, if it's defined, it returns a Boolean true if best weapon exists and has a value, then it should display this better be the master sword. But if not, it will display instead best weapon has not yet been defined. So let's run this example and see what happens through the PHP interpreter. And again, if we take a look at it, this better be the master sword. So in this case, it was defined. To complicate your PHP life a bit further, there are also variable variables. Basically, this is a little like C++ pointers, except that C++ pointers are much less confusing, at least from my perspective. A PHP variable is designated with two $signs instead of one, and can be used to create variables that are named after the values stored in other variables. So you could sort of think of linked list applications, or maybe something like C++ vectors. If you look at the following example, we have a normal variable, x, that holds the value link. Then next we have a variable. In this case, it will create a variable that holds the value, or that's named after the value of the first normal variable, x. Once again, I know this might be a little odd or confusing, so let's sort of re-summarize things. The first line of code is simple. It creates a variable named x and assigns to it the string value of link. The second line of code is a bit more involved. It creates a variable with the two $signs from the variable x created in the first line of code, and it names the second variable with the string value that has been stored within the first normal variable x. So there are two variables now. The first variable is named x and stores or holds the string value of link. The second variable, that is the variable, is named link, and it stores the value Zelda. That value was assigned to it via the assignment operator as a string literal. Again, if this sounds confusing, I'm with you. It's not my favorite part of PHP, but it can be useful in some applications. This example depicts a variable. Notice we have two variables, a normal variable that holds the value of link and is called x. We have a variable. What it's going to do then is create a variable using the value stored in x as the variable name, and then it will assign the value Zelda. So basically what will happen is this will have the value of link, and then this will create a variable called link, because this variable here, the variable receives its name from the value of the variable we used to create it with, and that would be displayed as Zelda. A bit confusing, and again, not my favorite part of PHP, but it can be very useful sometimes to use variables. Let's run it and see what happens under example 4e. So value of normal variable x is link, value of new variable link, which was created from the value of the previous variable, the normal variable, is Zelda. There is a whole plethora of methods and functions that go with PHP variables. Now, we don't have time to get into all of them right now. This is just the basics, remember? But I'm going to list a few of them here, and we'll go deeper into them as they apply later in other videos. So let's take a brief look at just some of these. There's getType to return a variable's data type, setType, which sets the data type of a variable, isSet, which returns true if the variable is set and false if not, unset, which destroys a variable, freeing the memory it consumed, empty, which returns true if a variable is null and false if not, isInteger returns true if the variable is an integer, isLong returns true if it's long, isFloat returns true if it's float, isDouble true if it's double, isReal true if it's real, isString true if it's string, isArray true if it's an array, and isObject true if it's an object. Just as an example, let's use one of these PHP variable methods, in this case the empty method. So we have a variable banana that holds the string literal value of pudding. As the condition part of the if statement, we're calling the empty method to see whether or not the variable banana is empty or it has value. So if it has no value and it is empty, it will simply echo banana is empty, and that will be sent to the client. But if it does have a value, and in this case it does, it's pudding, then it will display there will be pudding. Here's an example of using one of PHP's built-in variable methods, in this case the empty function, which will return true if a variable has no value or is empty, and false if not so. So we're going to define banana, and here it's null. If it's empty, no more pudding, else there will be pudding. This is the first example. Now, in the second example, banana will have a value, the string literal pudding stored within it. So unlike the first time we called empty, this time when we call empty, banana will have a value, so therefore instead of saying no more pudding, it will say there will be pudding. Let's run the example and see how it looks through the PHP interpreter. And if you look here, example 1, banana is empty, no more pudding. Example 2, banana is not empty, there will be pudding. We can't really have a discussion about variables without also going over the topic of scope. Besides, you wouldn't want to have bad breath, you might offend someone, and minty and cinnamon flavored mouthwash is a wonderful thing. Alright, that joke's old, and I use it way too much. All variables are imbued with an attribute known as scope. A variable's scope can be either local or global depending on where the variable is declared and how it is used. Local variables are only accessible from within the function in which they are declared. Global variables are declared outside of any local function, and therefore can be accessed by all functions within a PHP application. Use the keyword global to make a variable of global scope. For example, look at the following 3 variables. Now we have several examples dealing with variable scope, specifically global versus local. So let's look at example 1. We have a function here called sumfunc1. It's defined here, and we're calling it here. Now, any variable declared within the function sumfunc1 is local to that function. So we can access it from within the function. Location, x-coordinate, y-coordinate, no problem getting or retrieving those values when we're inside the function. However, because these are declared locally within the function, the problem is when the function is done, when it's over, we're going to lose the values of these variables because they're local and not global. So if I were to try to access the value of location outside of sumfunc1, it's going to give me a problem. This location is not the same as this location. This location was defined locally within the function, and this location exists outside the function. 2 separate variables, even though they have the same name. The only way that I would be able to access location equally from within and outside the function would be if location instead were declared globally. So let's see how that looks if we run it through the web browser. And you can see that when we're inside the function sumfunc1, location has the value of north 2. But once we leave the function, the value stored in location is destroyed. The memory is returned to the system, and there is no value. Let's move on to example 2. In example 2, we have some global variables. So outside of any function, we have declared location, x-coordinate, and y-coordinate. Now, because these are global, I can use them both out here, and I can also use them from within the function. So these are imported into the local function like so. I use the keyword global and location, x-coordinate, and y-coordinate. So even though these values, again, are at a different level of scope, I can use them either inside the function or outside the function. And so you will see that the value of location is the same both here inside of sumfunc2 and outside the function call once we leave. Let's run it and see the results. So again, inside function sumfunc2, location has the value of center1, and outside of the function, location has the value of center1. Here in example 3, we're going to explore the possibility that local variables can hide global variables. Notice here we have 3 variables, again, location, x-coordinate, y-coordinate, with the values center1, 10, and 15. Now, inside of our function, sumfunc3, we also have variables with the same name, but they have different values. Well, by default, if I'm going to display those variables, it's going to prefer or give precedence to the local variables over the global ones. So it's going to display these values before it displays these values. Here we're going to call the function. Basically, it will display the local values of location, x-coordinate, y-coordinate, not the globals. Then, once we're done with the function and outside of it, it's going to display not these values, but these values. So if we run it, once again, let's see what happens with example 3. Example 3, hiding global variables with local. We're inside sumfunc3. Notice these are all the local values, north 1, 9, and 13. But outside the function, here are the global values, center 1, 10, and 15. When dealing with scope, a very useful object is the globals array. Any variable declared as a global is automatically placed within the globals array. The globals array is a super global. It exists in all scopes. So it provides a convenient means of accessing global values from anywhere within a PHP application. If you look at the example, we have 3 globals here, location, x-coordinate, and y-coordinate, and their values are center 1, 10, and 15. Well, these are automatically placed in the globals array. Again, it's a super global. So inside the function sumfunc4, if I wanted to access the globals, I could simply use this syntax here. This is the syntax for accessing elements in an array, and this would be the variable names that we set up here, sans the or minus the $sign there. So if I were to look at it, by assigning values this way or in this fashion here, I can also change the values of the globals outside the function. Let's see how that looks. Go on to example 4 here. Okay, so inside sumfunc4, we have north 1, 9, and 13. And then outside of the function, back at the globals, north 1, 9, and 13. So you can see that using the globals array, I was able to modify the value of these globals outside the method. As we further explore the idea of variable scope, let's take a look at static variables in example 5. When you declare an object or a variable as static, that means that it exists across multiple instances built from that class. When you make something static, basically it's like making it global, even if you were to declare it locally. It will cause that variable, that object, to persist in memory. So taking a look at the function here, sumfunc5, we have 2 variables. They're local to the function sumfunc5, but they've been made static or declared as static. So they're initialized to be the value of 0 the very first time we call sumfunc5. Then at the bottom here, we're adding 10 to x-coordinate and y-coordinate. Now, the way functions work, every single time we call sumfunc5, if this code were placed here at the top of the method, then they should be reinitialized to 0 every single time. So in other words, they wouldn't retain their value. It wouldn't persist in memory. However, because x-coordinate and y-coordinate have been declared as static, that won't happen. It would be almost as if there were an if-else structure and the second, third, and fourth time sumfunc5 was being called, it simply skipped these 2 lines of code here. So because they've been declared static, they won't lose their value, they won't be reinitialized to 0. The second, third, and fourth time we call sum func 5. So if we look at the code here, that's what's going to happen when we run it. And we'll simply display the values of x-coordinate and y-coordinate. So let's go ahead and run the file here through the PHP interpreter. And example 5 using static variables, calling sum func the first time. Notice the value of x-coordinate and y-coordinate. Now after calling and exiting sum func 5, x-coordinate has a value of 9 and y-coordinate has a value of 13. Why? Because those were the global values. Now we're calling sum func the second time. And again, this is the local value from within sum func 5 of x-coordinate and y-coordinate. Notice that instead of 0, it's 10. So declaring those variables static caused them to persist in memory. Now we exit again, and now we're accessing the globals. Then we call sum func 5 a third time, and notice once again that 10 more have been added, and that x-coordinate and y-coordinate did not start over at 0. Because they were declared static. So once again, script can be a bit confusing, so you might want to pause the video and kind of peer through the code a little bit, but understand that x-coordinate and y-coordinate in sum func 5 are not necessarily the same as x-coordinate and y-coordinate outside of those methods. Once more, remember to use the define method to create variable constants. For example, we've been doing an adventure game application for learning C++ and Java. So if we were to do the same thing in PHP, we could create constants for the cardinal directions, such as C1 or N1, with the define method. In this case, a constant named C1 with a value of 0 and a constant named N1 with a value of 1. Though we have discussed them previously, let's delve a bit deeper into strings. They're one of the most useful types of variables in PHP. Strings are composed of a sequence or string of characters, hence the name. There are many built-in PHP methods for converting and manipulating strings in PHP. We will list some of them. To save some time, we're not going to go through each one of these methods one by one, but we will go into more detail later as we use them in different projects. For now, we're just going to list through some of them so you can see how many there are in PHP.